Okay, well, hello everyone. Profesor Cañedo here, and in this particular video, it's going to be something different. I'm not going to be doing any roll call in which I tell all my classes what's going on. So this is going to be the second of a series of videos in which I'll talk about the latest The Daughter of Fortune readings. And in this particular video, I'm going to go ahead and talk about chapters of 4 through 7. And in fact, let me just get my notes here to double check on the pages here. This is pages 58 to 115, and this corresponds to the chapters entitled "A Ruined Reputation," "Suitors," "Miss Rose," and "Love." So you already saw the first video. It's one that actually made for a previous section of this class. So from now on, the rest of these videos, these review videos will be hot off the presses, fresh, so to speak. And I definitely hope that these videos prove to be helpful as you continue to navigate through the Daughter of Fortune readings. And to do that, I've got my book notes actually queued up here on my iPad. So if you go ahead and forgive me, I'm going to go ahead and take off my glasses for the majority of the videos so I can get a better look at the information that's right on my iPad here. So let's go ahead and get into it. And let me go ahead and start off now by talking about the chapter 4, Ruined Reputation. And in this particular chapter, we look at the trials and tribulations of Jacob Todd. Jacob, as you've guessed by now, is definitely a bit of a free spirit. Is someone who really can't seem to find himself per se. Very, very idealistic, and in many respects, he seems to be a sort of a modern day version, or at least modern in the perspective that Isabel Allende has. A newer version of Don Quixote, someone who's trying to dream the impossible dream, someone who's always getting involved in all kinds of new activities, new enterprises. Anyone familiar with the classic Cervantes novel, of course, realizes that Sancho Panza was the one telling the Don Quixote to stop doing this silly stuff and be real, be pragmatic. And in a sense, Jacob is a version of Don Quixote. But as the chapter starts out, Allende also talks about what's happening in Chile. In that Chile in the mid 1840s, where the chapter starts, is definitely starting to be transformed. In that a lot of the Latin American nations at the time gained their independence from Spain, starting in roughly the 1810s. Mexico declared its independence in 1810, and they became independent a few years later. And then the other countries in Latin America followed suit. Chile, Argentina, places that we know today as Colombia, Venezuela. It's largely because of the work of people like Simón Bolívar, Bernardo O'Higgins, José de San Martín. People, of course, that undoubtedly my friend and colleague Dr. Contreras talks about in his classes, the 114 and 115. But with Latin America, with those countries getting away from the yoke, from the hold of Spanish rule, not surprisingly, new ideas, new thoughts, new goods, new products, just a lot of new items are pouring into Latin America. Much of the Latin American nations had been sealed off from the rest of the world, so to speak, during the time of Spanish colonialism, and not surprisingly, a lot of industrialists, especially the British and other Europeans, they're the ones who make their way into places like Chile. That's what Allende talks about when the chapter is beginning. As Allende points out, the country is changing as we have these new industrialists, new liberal ideas, new intellectuals. They're challenging the oligarchy, the ruling class of Chile. A lot of these people, of course, have their roots from the old-time Spaniards, who, of course, first came into these areas dating back to about the 16th century, and then getting more of a stranglehold in terms of economics and politics in the 17th century. But not surprisingly, when you have this type of economic political system, a lot of disparities between the rich and the poor, this is, of course, is stuff that set off things like the Mexican Revolution, and Allende touches upon that too. And Jacob, for his part, recognizes the widening gaps between the rich and the poor as chapter 4 begins to unfold. But since the chapter is called Ruined Reputation, of course, we see the problems that Jacob has, and in essence is his reputation that's ruined at this time. His venture to sell Bibles falls by the wayside. He's caught, and he's literally, you might say, going up the creek without out a paddle. He's contrasted a lot to the character we meet, Joaquin Andieta, and Joaquin is more pragmatic. That is, he's not prone to these wild pie in the sky ideas, and in some respects, Joaquin Andieta is like Sancho Panza, whereas, as I mentioned, Jacob is like Don Quixote. But some of the other characters that we see more of in chapter 4, of course, we have Polina del Valle Diaz and Polina. She's definitely one of the strong female figures in the novel. She's an industrialist. She's very astute when it comes to matters of economics or running a company. She pretty much puts her brothers to shame, and in essence, because Polina owes a lot of gratitude to Jacob earlier in the story, she offers Jacob a lifeline, but because Jacob has this wandering, nefarious spirit, he decides not to accept Polina's plan. And in a way, Jacob seems to epitomize what maybe a lot of Americans are feeling at this time too, in the 1840s, a sense of a wanderlust spirit, a can-do, romantic type of notion. I'll talk more about that when I talk about chapter 7. But in essence, a lot of the ideas that Jacob has, I think, in many respects, seems to be a metaphor for what Americans are feeling in the 1840s. And again, I'll touch upon that in more detail coming up a little bit later on in this video. Okay. Oh, one other note I want to mention about chapter 4 is that we also see what's happening with John Summers. Of course, that's Eliza's brother, and John, in essence, he's quite. He kind of seems to epitomize the balance between someone who's a dreamer but someone who's pragmatic. In that John recognizes the importance of the modern steamship. So that's a very important point to keep in mind, not only in the story but within U.S. history too. In the fact that steamships, these new innovations, these new technologies, whether it's steamships or other things such as the telegraph, canals, and of course the railroads, also epitomize this can-do, go-ahead spirit that the United States definitely epitomizes in the 1840s. And again, I'll say more about that in just a few moments. Okay, the next two chapters, chapter 5, Suitors, and chapter 6, Miss Rose, we get into, shall we say, some more romantic type of ideas. In chapter 5, we see where Eliza is really blossoming into a young lady. Rose is thinking about finding a marriage partner, but not amongst the Chilean oligarchy. As Allende writes, she's looking for a man with economic solvency and good character. But Rose, being the, I wouldn't say conniving, but the manipulative and maybe scheming a person that she is, she tries to arrange some sort of a dinner event in which the British English officer Michael Stewart is the object of Rose's attention as a mate for Eliza. But as you read in the chapter, things don't quite work out as they plan in many respects. Some of the stuff that happens seems to echo what you might see in a soap opera, especially during the 1970s and 1980s, when those soap operas were really, shall we say, wild in terms of their plot and the sort of days of our lives, guiding light, as the world turns, the list goes on and on. Also in chapter 5, we see where Eliza meets Joaquin. We're now coming into 1848, and she falls madly in love in Joaquin. And that, of course, will be a major plot point for the story, a major overriding theme, which I'll talk about, especially in upcoming videos. In chapter 6, we find a little bit more about Rose's background in the chapter called Miss Rose. And in this, Rose recalls her love affair with a Viennese tenor when she was 16. And this is the man by the name of Carl Bretzner. A lot of the language that Allende gets into in talking about the relationship between Rose and Carl really gets quite, I wouldn't say 50 Shades of Grey territory, but pretty damn close, for lack of a better term. And of course, in that chapter, we see where the marriage really gets out of control. The Summers family finds out about it, especially especially Jeremy. As you know, Jeremy is the really the puritanical, stick in the mud type of figure. You might say he's prototypical fuddy-duddy, for lack of a better term. And the end of the chapter shows the legacy of the romantic relationship, and that even though it's now years after the relationship, it's something that's definitely stayed with Rose for a good portion of her adult life. And on that note too, maybe at this point in time, as you're going through the readings and you come across chapter 5 and 6, you might be wondering to yourself, well, gee, Profesor Cañedo, this hardly seems to have any type of connection to history. If anything, there's a lot of wild stuff in here. And how does this connect to what's happening in our class, in History 108? Well, when I read the book a number of times, about 3 or 4 times before I started putting the assignment, that is putting the readings together, and of course the assignment together, the project that you have to do, I think that it occurred to me that in talking about history, it's really easy to fall into trap and think, okay, history is dates. Okay, who's the first president? It's George Washington. What happened in 1941 at Pearl Harbor? What was the end result of the 2000 election with Bush v. Gore? Blah blah blah. It's really easy to look back in time and just see history as a series of names, dates, events, because obviously the people at the core, they're long dead, they're no longer on the scene. But I think what Allende does is she gives history a human face, in that we look at the motivations of people as they are people. So in other words, everybody, maybe some of the antics that we hear about, whether it's the political stuff, some of the personal the mudslinging going on between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, or whether we're looking at just events happening in some of the reality TV shows. Well, he said that and she said that, and I'm not talking to him because he told her that that she's dating him. Blah blah blah. I mean, it's easy to I guess make fun of that silly stuff, so to speak. But I think the point of all this here is that humans are driven by silly stuff. We're driven by our basic emotions, and whether it's anger, jealousy, lust, fear, greed, those types of things. And I would imagine that all these human emotions and ideas were definitely very evident back in those days. So in other words, people get angry and jealous in 2016. Obviously, they did it in 1916. They did it in 1816. And they did it back in 1492. So I think that's the point that Allende is trying to bring to the table in talking about some of the more prurient, I guess it's the right word to say, elements when it comes to things such as sexuality and these bedroom games, these silly parlor games. That's what humans did back in those days, and I think she's just proving to us that humans were driven by those basic emotions. And it doesn't matter what era you're in. So I think it's a really important point to keep in mind. What are the basic human emotions, the basic passions which should drive people? That's going to be a recurring theme as the story progresses, and I'll touch upon that in more detail with some of the later videos. Okay, chapter 7. Chapter 7 is love, so of course this love romantic theme definitely persists here. And in this chapter, here is where Rose tries to intervene to stop Eliza's foolishness, in that she is totally head over heels to Joaquin Andieta at this time. They meet over the next 5 weeks. And Joaquin shares more about his life to Eliza, talking about the fact that he felt he was a mistake to his mother. But there is one important point that I think that's really significant toward the end of the chapter. One of the things that Allende mentions that is through the medium of Joaquin is that we hear about the idea of Romanticism that Joaquin is involved in. He's fascinated by the theories of philosopher Lamennais, and he considers himself what's called to be a fundamental Christian. He believes that government only represents the interests of the rich and other political ideas. So, in other words, everybody, Joaquin's, for his part, also like Jacob, seems to represent a romantic and I would say restless spirit that people of the mid 18th century were feeling. It didn't matter if you were American, it didn't matter if you were English, it didn't matter if you were Chilean. the world was changing dramatically in the mid-19th century. Nations were becoming independent. There were new technologies linking the world, whether it was, of course, steamship, and of course, within the nations themselves, like the U.S., the railroads would, of course, do a great part of linking the country and linking people to each other. There's new industries, new technologies, new weapons of war. It's during this time where, of course, the English Empire is spreading all over the world. That's where we get the famous phrase, "The sun never sets on the English Empire." So, of course, people in England, they're learning about they're learning about India, they're learning about Africa, and of course, they're learning about Latin America. And even though the colonies were now the United States, of course, people in England were still interested in what was happening in places like Pennsylvania, like Massachusetts, like New York, those places. So, in other words, the world, much like what's happening in the late 20th century and early 21st century with social media, the internet, globalization, all of that fun stuff. That stuff, in a way, was happening quite a bit in the mid-19th century, and people were trying to figure out how to deal with that. And of course, Americans were certainly quite intrigued by that too, because it's during this time it's during this time where we get into the 1848, 1849, where of course the gold rush starts to come into the picture. And when the gold rush comes into the picture, that definitely you might say puts Americans on the path with not just going to other nations, but coming across the different people. So again, the idea of globalization seems to be very, very evident, and people in the world, not just not just Americans, not just the English, and not just the Latin Americans. They're trying to figure out how to make sense of their new changing world. So I think that's a very important overriding theme that's really evident as we get further and further into the Daughter of Fortune story. Okay, before I wrap up the video, let me just quickly I'll quickly try to tie this together to what's happening with the readings from Humboldt America, and of course the readings that you had last week were the ones. In fact, let me just get my notes here. Okay, the reading had last week had to do with the consolidation of slavery in the South. So that's a really important point to keep in mind, because of course Southerners were interested in expanding slavery. So when they come across new lands and new territories, even a place like Latin America and the Caribbean, many policymakers are interested in the idea of expanding slavery into those areas too. So in other words, all Americans, whether you were from the North or the South, Americans had this idea that they wanted to spread their ideas, spread their thoughts, their motivations to other areas. And even though, of course, North and South were fundamentally different on so many levels, the idea of, shall we say, spreading values to new areas, to new people, I think that was definitely something that was held quite in common in North and South. And when you combine that together, that gives you the, shall we say, the origins or some of the beginnings of the notion of manifest destiny. So in other words, we're pretty much at the point where manifest destiny really is about to take root in the United States. We'll read more about that over the next couple of weeks. And when we get to the actual gold rush happening in California, one could make the observation that the notion of manifest destiny is definitely playing into that equation too. We equate manifest destiny with the U.S.-Mexican War, and even though that war ends successfully for the United States, the idea of manifest destiny didn't stop right there. It continued for future years, and we'll see how that idea really plays out when we get further into the story. In fact, coming up in next week's review video, I'll touch upon that in a little bit more detail. All right, so there you have it, everybody. I hope this video helped in terms of giving you a sense of some of the wider themes and of course my perspective, my thoughts about the story. By no means are these videos going to be super exhaustive in that I'll review everything about the story. It'd be pretty much impossible for me to really do that. But at the same time, I think it's important for you to get a sense of where I'm coming from with respect to the story, and to give you something as a bit of a building block or a tool, and then of course you draw your own conclusions as to the importance of the story itself within the context of U.S. history. And of course, for the rest of these videos, as best as I can, I'll connect up elements of the story to what's happening in U.S. history, especially with the Who Built America readings that are concurrent, that are in conjunction with the Daughter Fortune readings. Okay, everyone. So that's it. So we just wrapped up at a little over 20 minutes, and I'll try to keep all these videos at about the 20-minute period, and try not to get too out of control, like 25 or half hour or anything like that. So I hope this video helps, and when I rejoin you for the next review video, I will go ahead and talk about the events happening in chapters 8 to 10 of the story.